recalled to combat my face a brutal public betrayal by her own father, only for a high-ranking general to intervene and trigger a legendary collapse of her family's organ in pride.
I never imagined my own blood would publicly humiliate me during what was supposed to be a celebration. My name is Jordan, a 36-year-old former combat medic who survived an active war zone, only to face betrayal at home. I stood quietly in the center of a marble ballroom at a coastal San Diego resort, while hundreds of wealthy elites stared at my formal military uniform with obvious distaste. My father completely shattered the elegant atmosphere when he marched toward me with a face flushed red from pure anger. He did not hesitate to scream insults directly at me, while the entire crowd of important investors watched in absolute shock. The situation escalated very rapidly because he ultimately decided that simple verbal abuse was nowhere near enough to satisfy his rage. At my brother's wedding, my father stood up and ordered, "Take those ridiculous medals off your suit. You embarrass me." I tried to stay calm, but he stepped forward and pushed me right in the middle of the ceremony in front of 500 guests. The forceful shove caught me completely off guard because I never expected physical violence from my own family. I lost my balance, crashing onto the polished floor, while a suffocating silence instantly smothered the entire venue. Before the burning humiliation could fully take over my mind, a highly respected four-star general of the United States Army stepped out from the paralyzed crowd. He confidently took control of the chaotic situation with a commanding presence that made every single person hold their breath. Welcome to Gentle Drama Stories, so please follow my story until the very end to discover exactly how an arrogant family learns the ultimate price of their ungrateful actions. Exactly 1 hour before that terrible incident took place right in the middle of the main resort hall, a completely different confrontation was already brewing in the shadows. My father and my brother Bennett deliberately cornered me in an empty VIP hallway, just as I was preparing to enter the reception area. Their angry faces immediately displayed absolute contempt for the formal military uniform I was proudly wearing. They blocked my path with an aggressive posture that clearly showed they intended to bully me into submission before anyone else could see me. My father is a demanding man in his late 60s who constantly prioritizes superficial appearances and immense wealth above everything else in his privileged life. He forcefully demanded that I immediately go upstairs to change into a highly expensive designer evening gown that he had previously picked out for me. He firmly believed my current attire would severely embarrass our family in front of his major corporate partners who were attending the wedding. His eyes scanned the decorations on my chest with genuine disgust while he aggressively pointed his finger toward the elevator doors to demand my compliance. This is high society rather than your battlefield, so do not bring that impoverished look here to tarnish the pristine reputation of this family. My father growled with a dark expression that warned me not to disobey his strict orders. Bennett immediately chimed in to verbally support his father's unreasonable stance, while arrogantly adjusting his expensive custom-tailored tuxedo to emphasize his wealth. Bennett genuinely believed that the presence of a military service member with a seemingly meager salary would significantly lower the exclusive class of his lavish wedding reception. He argued fiercely that my specific clothing choices would deeply insult the highly important guests he had specifically invited to secure his future business contracts. Bennett viewed this entire wedding as a crucial networking event where everyone was required to play a specific wealthy role to impress his wealthy in-laws. Dressing like that makes our guests think this family completely lacks basic class, so can you not simply pretend to be a normal person for just a few hours? Bennett sneered with a remarkably condescending tone while looking me up and down like I was a piece of trash. Refusing to let their toxic words break my spirit, I firmly defended my professional honor against their entirely ridiculous accusations. My patient explanation detailed how this military uniform, along with the earned medals pinned tightly to my chest, represent ultimate sacrifice and spilled blood. It was absolutely crucial for them to fully understand that these decorations were earned through saving lives in horrific combat conditions while they were safely sitting in their comfortable corporate offices judging my career. Furthermore, I made it absolutely clear that my decorated service is never something to be cheaply weighed against their superficial luxury dresses or their incredibly shallow social status. My calm but resolute explanation only seemed to fuel their anger further because they were completely unaccustomed to anyone defying their direct commands. Our intense argument quickly reached a boiling point, ending with my father exploding into absolute fury over my stubborn refusal to comply with his outrageous demands. His face turned a deep shade of crimson as he stepped even closer to intimidate me with his physical presence. He strictly forbade me from stepping foot inside the main reception hall until I agreed to wear the clothing he deemed appropriate for his wealthy audience. Realizing in that exact moment that no amount of reasoning would ever pierce through their impenetrable wall of arrogance and greed, I knew there was only one viable option left. Ignoring his empty threats completely, I purposefully turned my back on both of them without saying another single word. Squaring my shoulders with military precision allowed me to walk straight toward the grand entrance of the ballroom to face the guests on my own terms. Their angry shouts echoed faintly down the empty corridor, while I mentally prepared myself for the public scrutiny that was waiting for me inside. The exact moment my body violently collided with the floor, an overwhelming invisible pressure suddenly swept through the murmuring crowd. General Jonathan Price forcefully pushed his way through the stunned onlookers with purposeful strides toward the center of the altercation. His large, weathered hand shot forward to clamp down firmly on my father's raised wrist, like a steel vise. The immense physical strength behind that grip immediately forced my father to stumble backward in absolute terror. "Show respect right now," General Price roared with a deeply resonant voice that carried absolute authority across the entire venue. That commanding tone instantly paralyzed my father while completely silencing the whispers of the wealthy elites surrounding us. The imposing military leader then turned his attention downward to offer me his hand with profound reverence. He carefully helped me stand back up on my feet while deliberately dusting off the shoulder of my uniform. Turning back to face the sea of shocked corporate investors, he prepared to deliver a revelation that would destroy their arrogant assumptions. "The woman you all just publicly insulted is a special operations combat medic who bravely charged straight through heavy rebel crossfire to physically drag me along with 12 other wounded soldiers away from certain death," he announced with unyielding conviction. My brother's bride Cassidy instinctively stepped forward in a desperate attempt to de-escalate the incredibly tense situation. Her confident, wealthy demeanor evaporated the very second she processed the 4 gleaming stars pinned to the general's uniform. She abruptly froze in her tracks while her perfectly manicured face turned completely pale from the sudden realization of his immense power. Cassidy acutely understood that the most influential political figure on their exclusive guest list had just openly sided with the very person her new family had violently humiliated. She quickly backed away to distance herself from the unfolding catastrophe before his wrath could extend to her own reputation. The collective attitude of the 500 attendees shifted radically within the span of a few heartbeats. Those exact same people who had previously looked at my military attire with extreme disdain now stared at me with profound awe. Their judgmental glares rapidly transformed into expressions of pure disgust aimed entirely at my father and Bennett. The wealthy business partners who had eagerly engaged with my family earlier were now physically stepping away to avoid any association. Bennett nervously adjusted his collar while looking around the room for any friendly faces, only to find cold rejection everywhere. General Price maintained a piercing glare that effectively pinned my father to his spot without requiring another physical touch. He made sure that every single person in that lavish ballroom clearly heard the undeniable truth about my decorated service record. He pointed a steady finger directly at the bronze star resting on my chest to emphasize the monumental weight of that specific honor. The sheer gravity of his words hung heavily in the air, while the orchestra remained completely silent in the background. My father opened his mouth to formulate some sort of pathetic excuse, but the words simply died in his throat. He looked desperately toward his closest corporate allies, hoping for some intervention, but they merely averted their eyes in unified shame. The pristine reputation he had spent decades carefully building among the San Diego elite was actively crumbling into dust right before his eyes. He slowly lowered his head, while his face shifted from flushed anger to the sickly pale color of absolute defeat. Bennett also realized the catastrophic implications of offending a high-ranking military official who controlled massive government defense contracts. The arrogant smirk that had dominated his face just an hour ago was entirely replaced by visible panic. He took a hesitant step backward, hoping to blend into the crowd, but the guests actively parted to leave him exposed. The harsh reality of their monumental mistake crashed down upon them, while they stood completely isolated in the middle of their own extravagant celebration. No one dared to speak a single word against the general, as he stood firmly by my side as an impenetrable shield. His presence alone validated every single sacrifice I had ever made during my combat deployment overseas. The superficial hierarchy of wealth was instantly shattered by the undeniable power of genuine honor and battlefield courage. Exactly 10 minutes after the shocking declaration from the respected military leader, the glamorous facade meticulously built by my family was completely torn apart. General Price firmly decided against using his immense authority to make some illogical phone call to immediately cancel their lucrative defense contracts. He instead chose to stand tall before the most influential corporate partners in the room to directly condemn the profound moral decay of the wedding hosts. The imposing officer projected his voice across the silent ballroom to ensure every single wealthy guest understood the severe consequences of disrespecting military sacrifice. People like you absolutely do not represent the core values or the integrity that we actively choose to work with. General Price stated with a freezing tone directed straight at my father and Bennett. The distinguished commander made it abundantly clear that their arrogant display of ungratefulness served as a direct insult to the fundamental concept of loyalty. He publicly refused to maintain any future social connections or business relationships with their enterprise from that exact second onward. His uncompromising stance effectively severed the most important professional lifeline that my father had spent countless years desperately trying to secure for his ambitious company. The immense weight of that undeniable rejection visibly crushed the remaining confidence right out of my brother's trembling body. This devastating verbal condemnation from such a highly revered figure immediately sent a visible wave of panic throughout the crowd of wealthy attendees. The high society figures who had previously toasted to my family's success were now looking at them as if they carried a highly contagious disease. General, we had absolutely no idea they behaved with such a concerning lack of humanity, because their conduct tonight is truly shameful. A prominent investor nervously spoke up while quickly taking several steps away from my father. Other influential executives nodded in vigorous agreement while actively shifting their physical positions to avoid being associated with the disgraced hosts of the ruined evening. The palpable desperation in the room highlighted exactly how fragile their supposedly unbreakable elite social circle truly was when faced with real consequence. The immediate departure of General Price from the reception hall served as the ultimate catalyst for an unstoppable domino effect among the assembled elite guests. Dozens of vital investors alongside crucial business partners hastily stood up from their decorated tables to mutter weak excuses about sudden emergencies demanding their immediate attention. They practically rushed toward the grand exit doors in a desperate bid to distance their own corporate reputations from the impending collateral damage. My father reached out his trembling hands to his oldest colleagues to somehow salvage the situation, but they deliberately ignored his pleading gestures to continue their swift exit. The stark reality of losing his most important financial backers caused Bennett to literally stumble backward against the main dining table in sheer disbelief. He tried to call out the names of his corporate mentors, but his voice was completely drowned out by the hurried footsteps of hundreds of people abandoning him. The previously vibrant celebration transformed into an absolute social disaster as the massive venue emptied out at an astonishingly rapid pace without anyone looking back. The hired catering staff stood awkwardly by the walls holding trays of expensive champagne while observing the chaotic mass exodus of San Diego's most prominent figures. Cassidy remained standing completely frozen in the center of the rapidly clearing ballroom, while the horrific reality of the unfolding situation fully washed over her mind. She acutely realized that the prestigious social standing of her new in-laws had been thoroughly obliterated within a matter of mere minutes through their own arrogant actions. Her perfectly planned dream wedding had instantly morphed into a legendary scandal that would inevitably dominate the relentless wealthy gossip circles for many years to come. The deafening silence left behind by the fleeing guests finalized the absolute destruction of their carefully crafted public image without requiring any further intervention. Exactly 2 weeks after that catastrophic evening in San Diego, a devastating collapse of their once pristine reputation systematically began eroding the very foundation of their wealthy lives. Someone from the wedding crowd had secretly recorded the precise moment my father violently shoved a decorated military veteran across the polished ballroom floor. That highly damaging footage inevitably leaked online before spreading like wildfire through the exclusive social circles of the entire West Coast elite. The undeniable visual proof of his cruelty completely shattered the sophisticated image he had carefully projected for decades. Their prominent family name instantly transformed from a highly respected corporate brand into the ultimate focal point of a massive, unstated social boycott. Former friends completely ignored their desperate phone calls while country clubs quietly revoked their exclusive memberships without offering any formal explanations. Nobody in their right mind wanted to be photographed standing next to a man who would publicly abuse a decorated soldier. The board of directors governing my father's lucrative defense contracting company immediately convened a series of emergency meetings to address the rapidly escalating public relations nightmare. These powerful executives openly expressed profound loss of faith regarding his leadership capabilities after witnessing his appalling lack of basic human decency on camera. Long-standing corporate partners continuously cited obscure ethical clauses in their extensive contracts to legally justify severing all business ties with the severely tainted enterprise. The rapidly expanding corporate scandal forced the executive board to seriously reconsider the viability of allowing a publicly disgraced man to remain at the helm. Our corporate image is currently hitting absolute rock bottom because we simply cannot retain a chairman who was literally just featured on the national news for physically assaulting a female military veteran, a senior board member harshly criticized during a highly contentious executive vote. That relentless pressure from widespread social abandonment quickly translated into catastrophic financial consequences for the entire corporate operation within a matter of days. Major banking institutions closely monitoring the terrible press coverage immediately decided to pull several crucial credit lines that historically kept their daily operations afloat. Stock values began to plummet as rumors of impending bankruptcy circulated freely among nervous shareholders who frantically tried to liquidate their positions. The sudden disruption of essential cash flow created a massive chain reaction that thoroughly paralyzed the internal functioning of the defense contracting firm. Suppliers suddenly demanded immediate upfront payments that my father simply could not provide without the critical financial support of his fleeing investors. The massive empire he had sacrificed everything to build was rapidly suffocating under the immense weight of his own arrogant miscalculations. The profound humiliation of being actively shunned by the exact same high society elite she worshipped eventually pushed Cassidy to her absolute breaking point. She absolutely refused to attend any more social gatherings where former friends would blatantly turn their backs on her the second she walked into a room. The luxurious lifestyle she had eagerly anticipated upon marrying into this wealthy family had violently morphed into an inescapable social prison filled with constant judgment. She finally confronted her husband in the grand foyer of their massive estate, while angrily throwing expensive designer clothing into several large leather suitcases. "You continuously promised me a life of elite luxury, but now everywhere I go, people only point at me as the pathetic wife of an uneducated brute. So I absolutely refuse to endure this profound humiliation for another single minute." Cassidy screamed furiously directly into Bennett's pale face. Bennett stood there completely paralyzed by the overwhelming reality that his carefully constructed world was completely disintegrating from every possible angle, without any way to stop it. Cassidy aggressively zipped her heavy luggage shut before demanding a formal legal separation to decisively protect her own maiden family name from their spreading toxic fallout. She marched straight out the heavy front doors of the mansion, without ever looking back at the wealthy man she had recently vowed to love. He was left entirely alone in the echoing hallway to finally comprehend the true magnitude of the total destruction his family had foolishly invited upon themselves. The luxurious wedding gift sitting in the adjacent room served as a bitter reminder of the prestigious life that had completely vanished. By the time we reached the third month after that disastrous wedding evening, a harsh reality, along with a severe financial decline, began to completely suffocate the men who were once accustomed to living in absolute luxury. To manage the mountain of debts following his forced resignation as chairman, my father was ultimately compelled to sell his expensive coastal mansion at a massive loss. He had to quietly move into a cramped and outdated apartment located in a very modest neighborhood far away from his former elite social circles. The transition from a sprawling estate to a tiny living space with peeling wallpaper served as a constant reminder of his sudden fall from grace. He spent most of his days staring at the sparse furniture while realizing that his previous influence had vanished along with his bank balance. Bennett remained entirely unemployed during this period, despite his desperate efforts to secure a new executive position at several other prominent firms within the industry. He carried his once impressive resume to dozens of large companies, only to be politely rejected by every single human resources department he encountered. Nobody in the professional world wanted to hire a person who carried such a toxic public reputation following the legendary scandal in San Diego. His former colleagues now viewed him as a liability rather than an asset, effectively blacklisting him from the high-level corporate roles he felt entitled to hold. The harsh realization that his name was now synonymous with ungratefulness caused him to return home in a state of growing bitterness every evening. "Everything is entirely your fault, because if you had not decided to push her right in front of all those influential people, I would not have lost my wife, or watched my entire future turn into this pathetic disaster," Bennett shouted while angrily throwing a thick stack of rejection letters onto the small dining table. This overwhelming poverty and the lack of basic necessities caused these two previously arrogant men to constantly turn on each other with increasing hostility. Their cramped new living quarters were filled with relentless shouting matches as they took turns blaming one another for their shared misfortune. The psychological pressure of their social isolation made them incredibly volatile because they no longer had any subordinates to intimidate or wealth to hide behind. Every minor inconvenience in their daily lives triggered a new wave of resentment that further eroded what was left of their fractured relationship. They were now trapped in a vicious cycle of mutual hatred while living in a place they would have previously considered beneath their dignity. "What right do you possibly have to blame me when you were the one who eagerly joined in to insult your sister?" just because you were afraid of looking bad in front of your wealthy friends," my father bellowed back, while slamming his hand down on the table to silence his son. Without their lavish parties or the constant flattery of fawning business partners, they found themselves completely isolated from the world they once thought they dominated. They were forced to face the cold reality of mounting utility bills and overdue notices that continued to pile up on their kitchen counter every single week. The prestigious social invitations that used to clutter their calendars were replaced by stern warnings from collection agencies demanding immediate payment for their past luxuries. The stark contrast between their former champagne lifestyle and their current struggle for basic survival created a profound sense of desperation they had never experienced before. They had to learn how to navigate public transportation and budget for simple groceries, while realizing that their elite status had been nothing more than a fragile illusion. The deep psychological toll of their collective failure became more apparent as they spent more time confined within the four walls of their dismal apartment. They were haunted by the memory of the respect they once commanded and the comfort they had foolishly thrown away for the sake of their own hollow pride. The silence from their former social circle was deafening, because not a single person reached out to offer any form of assistance, or even a simple word of encouragement. They were finally beginning to understand that their worth had been entirely tied to their bank accounts, rather than their characters. This dark realization left them both feeling hollow and utterly defeated as they contemplated a future that looked increasingly bleak with every passing day. Their shared misery did not bring them closer together, but instead acted as a catalyst for even more profound division and lingering resentment. Each day brought a new struggle to maintain their dwindling pride, while the world outside continued to move on as if they had never existed at all. They were now just two insignificant men living in a forgotten corner of the city while grappling with the heavy consequences of their own ungrateful actions. The luxury they once took for granted had become a distant and painful memory that only served to sharpen the sting of their current reality. By the late afternoon of a weekend in the 5th month, my endurance officially reached its absolute limit after enduring weeks of their relentless and exhausting harassment. Following dozens of desperate phone calls along with pathetic text messages that I had already blocked on my phone, my father and Bennett finally showed up unannounced right at my front door. They looked incredibly disheveled while wearing wrinkled clothing that made them look completely different from the arrogant and wealthy men they used to be. The polished facade of their former prestigious lives had entirely evaporated to reveal two broken individuals who were clearly struggling to survive their self-inflicted downfall. They stood on my porch with hunched shoulders while looking around nervously as if they were afraid someone from their old social circle might see them in this humiliated state. "You are truly our very last chance to fix this disaster, so please just agree to step forward and issue a formal statement to the media, claiming that everything was just a huge misunderstanding, so we can finally start rebuilding our lives together." My father pleaded with a low voice while his eyes filled with a hollow sense of absolute desperation. My best friend Sarah was fortunately present at my house during that exact moment because she had been helping me navigate the emotional aftermath of the recent family chaos. She stood silently behind me with her arms folded across her chest to provide a solid wall of emotional support without ever feeling the need to interrupt our tense conversation. Her calm and steady presence gave me the additional strength I needed to face these two toxic men without feeling any lingering sense of guilt or familial obligation. I looked directly into my father's tired eyes while feeling absolutely nothing but a cold realization that he only cared about my existence because he needed something from me. "No. You deliberately chose that specific wedding day to destroy everything with your own hands and your violent actions. Tonight are the undeniable truth, which means there is absolutely nothing left for me to clarify or correct for your benefit." I responded with a resolute voice that contained no trace of mercy or hesitation. Bennett tried to aggressively push his way forward to use our shared blood relation as a tool to manipulate my emotions, while claiming that I was being unnecessarily cruel to my own family. I immediately took a firm step backward to maintain my personal space while pointing my hand directly toward the street to signal that their presence was no longer tolerated on my property. I made it very clear that I would never again negotiate with people who had so willingly trampled on my professional honor and personal dignity just to satisfy their own shallow pride. My refusal to engage with his manipulative tactics seemed to stun him, because he was still clearly expecting me to be the same submissive person I used to be before the scandal. Realizing that they still intended to remain on my porch, while beginning to shout insults about my supposed lack of loyalty, I decided to take decisive action to protect my peace of mind. I firmly slammed the heavy front door shut to silence their pathetic excuses before immediately contacting my personal attorney to initiate the formal legal process for a restraining order. My best friend Sarah stood by my side as I explained the ongoing harassment to the legal authorities to ensure that these two men would never be allowed to bother me again. This official legal barrier was the only way to permanently block their desperate attempts to drag me back into the toxic whirlpool of their failing lives. The silence that followed their forced departure was the most beautiful sound I had heard in several months, because it signaled the final end of their influence over my future. I felt a massive weight lift off my chest as I watched their old car slowly pull away from my driveway through the window of my quiet living room. Sarah placed a supportive hand on my shoulder, while reminding me that I had every right to choose my own mental health over the demands of people who only saw me as a convenience. We spent the rest of the evening discussing my future plans while the sun slowly set over the horizon to mark the beginning of a life completely free from their shadow. I was finally ready to move forward without the constant fear of being hunted by the ghosts of a family that had never truly loved the real me. Exactly 6 months after the defining moment I turned my back on that chaotic wedding ballroom, my life has officially transitioned into a completely fresh and tranquil chapter. I often sit on my sun-drenched porch while slowly sipping my morning black coffee and carefully touching the military medals preserved in their glass display case. A profound sense of pride washes over me because I finally realize that the difficult path of service I chose was worth every single sacrifice. My father and Bennett are now distant memories from a toxic past that no longer has any power to disrupt my emotional well-being. I have successfully built a fortress of peace around my daily routine, while focusing entirely on my own professional growth and personal happiness. Bennett is currently forced to work as a lowly sales clerk at a local electronics store, where he earns just enough to survive from one paycheck to the next. He spends his long shifts dealing with difficult customers, while realizing that his former executive title and arrogant attitude mean absolutely nothing in the real world. Meanwhile, my father remains confined within his small and dismal apartment, where he lives in a state of constant regret and social isolation. The high society circles of San Diego have completely turned their backs on him, while leaving him to grapple with the heavy weight of his own ungrateful actions. Their dramatic downfall was not caused by any magical force, but resulted directly from a society that consistently values integrity and moral character over superficial wealth. This production is brought to you by the Revenge Mode channel to provide an educational exploration of healthy personal boundaries and rational crisis management through the lens of the law. We aim to demonstrate that protecting your own dignity is a fundamental right that should never be sacrificed for the convenience of toxic family members. My determined actions throughout this ordeal serve as a powerful testament to the necessity of standing firm against those who attempt to diminish your worth or your service. The antagonists in this story are facing the inevitable consequences of their own poor decisions, while I have found the ultimate victory through self-respect and total independence. Looking back at this entire journey, I have realized several deeply profound lessons that I hope will resonate with every single one of you today. First, true family consists of people who support you unconditionally, rather than those who simply share your bloodline only to subject you to emotional abuse and manipulation. Second, any level of pride built solely on a fragile foundation of financial status is destined to crumble the very second your lack of character is exposed. Finally, the genuine honor of a human being is never measured by the price of their clothing, but by the blood and sacrifice they have offered to the world. I want to express my most sincere gratitude to every person who has patiently listened to the very end of my personal journey here on Revenge Mode. Your continued support and engagement mean the absolute world to me as I continue to share these powerful stories of justice and personal growth. What is your honest opinion regarding my decisive choice to never offer them forgiveness after everything they did to destroy my reputation? Would you have handled this toxic family situation differently, or do you believe they truly received exactly what they deserved for their ungrateful behavior? Please share your detailed thoughts in the comments below, and remember to subscribe for more compelling stories.
Câu chuyện hư cấu này là một lời cảnh tỉnh mạnh mẽ về sự mong manh của địa vị được xây dựng trên nền tảng kiêu ngạo. Khi Jordan bị chính cha mình Gregory công khai hành hung, câu chuyện khơi gài sự yếu nhân cách sâu sắc mà không một khối tài sản nào có thể che giấu. Sự can thiệp của tướng Gregory trở thành bước ngoặt đạo đức, chứng minh rằng sự tôn trọng thật sự phải được giành lấy bằng hy sinh, chứ không phải thừa hưởng từ tài khoản ngân hàng. Sự sụp đổ sau đó của gia đình, đánh mất địa vị xã hội và sự ổn định tài chính, cho thấy quy luật nhân quả tự nhiên trong một thế giới cuối cùng vẫn đề cao sự chính trực. Quyết định thiết lập ranh giới pháp lý nghiêm ngặt của Jordan nhấn mạnh tầm quan trọng của việc bảo vệ bản thân thay vì mù quáng trung thành với những mối quan hệ độc hại. Nếu chính gia đình bạn xem thường những thành tựu lớn nhất của bạn, bạn sẽ phản ứng thế nào? Hãy chia sẻ góc nhìn cá nhân của bạn trong phần bình luận bên dưới và cùng tham gia thảo luận về những bài học cuộc sống quan trọng này nhé.